The quarry looked like a scar in the earth. From the ridge above it, the pit stretched wide and silent, its stone walls dropping straight down into dark water that had slowly filled the bottom over the years. The surface reflected the gray autumn sky like a dull mirror. Most people in the valley avoided the place. The abandoned quarry had been closed for nearly 15 years after the mining company pulled out and left the town with a deep hole in the ground and a few rusting machines. The locals said it was useless, dangerous, a reminder of something that had never worked out. And now, apparently, it belonged to me. I stood beside the lawyer at the edge of the ridge, staring down at the water. "This can't be right," I said quietly. The lawyer cleared his throat and unfolded the paper again. "According to the property records, Mrs. Hale, the quarry was purchased by your husband 5 years ago." I blinked. "Daniel bought this?" "Yes." "Why?" The lawyer shrugged. "That wasn't mentioned in the documents." I looked down again at the flooded quarry. The wind rippled across the dark water below, sending small waves against the stone walls. Daniel had never mentioned owning a quarry. Not once. In the short 3 years we had been married, he had told me about cattle, fences, crops, even the smallest repairs around our farm. But never this. Behind me, someone chuckled. I turned. 3 men from town had followed us up the ridge. Jacob Turner, the rancher from the South Valley, leaned against his horse with a grin on his face. "Well," he said, "looks like Daniel left you quite the treasure." The other men laughed. I ignored them and looked back at the lawyer. "And this is all that's left." He nodded apologetically. The farm and livestock were held under the Hale family agreement, which meant they now belonged to Daniel's older brother, not to me. I felt the familiar sting of anger rising in my chest. Daniel had died only 2 weeks earlier, thrown from his horse while repairing the northern fence. Just like that. 3 years of marriage ended in a single afternoon, and the only thing left in my name was a flooded stone pit everyone in the valley thought was worthless. The lawyer folded the document. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hale." I looked at the quarry again. The water sat at the bottom like a dark lake surrounded by sheer rock walls. The old mining road spiraled down one side of the pit, half buried under weeds and broken gravel. Rusting machinery sat along the edges where the company had abandoned it years ago. No buildings, no crops, no pasture, just rock and water. "Well," Jacob Turner called from behind me, "looks like you're the proud owner of the biggest puddle in the county." The men laughed again. I didn't respond. Instead, I started walking down the old quarry road. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I followed the winding path toward the bottom. The men watched from the ridge. "Careful down there," one of them shouted. "Wouldn't want to lose your inheritance." By the time I reached the bottom of the quarry, the sun had dipped lower in the sky. The stone walls towered above me like the inside of a massive bowl. And the water was clearer than I expected. I knelt near the edge and dipped my hand into the surface. Cold, but not freezing. The depth was impossible to judge from the shore. The water faded quickly into dark blue where the old quarry floor dropped away. A flooded pit like this could be incredibly deep. I stood and looked around the basin. Daniel had bought this place for a reason. He wasn't the kind of man to waste money on useless land, which meant there had to be something here. Something the rest of the valley hadn't noticed. I started walking along the edge of the water. Near the far wall of the quarry, I found the first clue. A metal pipe. It stuck out from the rock face about 2 feet above the waterline. Water trickled slowly from the pipe into the quarry pool. I frowned. That wasn't natural. Someone had installed that pipe deliberately. I followed it with my eyes along the rock wall. The pipe disappeared into a narrow stone channel carved into the quarry wall, which meant something important. Water was flowing into the quarry from somewhere else. A spring. I climbed up the rocky slope beside the pipe until I reached this small channel feeding it. Clear water bubbled steadily from a crack in the stone. A natural underground spring. I stared at it for a moment, then slowly looked back at the flooded quarry below. An idea began forming in my mind. The valley farms had one constant problem every summer: water. During dry seasons, the streams shrank until cattle had to be moved miles away for grazing. Crops withered. Wells ran low. The entire valley depended on unpredictable rainfall. But here, in the quarry, water was collecting year-round. A deep reservoir fed by a natural spring. I climbed back down to the water's edge. If the quarry could hold water like this, then maybe it could do something more. Something the valley desperately needed. That evening I returned to the ridge where the men still waited. Jacob Turner looked surprised when he saw me coming back up. "Well," he said, "did you find anything valuable in that puddle?" "Yes." The men exchanged amused glances. "Oh," Turner asked. "What?" I pointed toward the quarry below. "A reservoir." They stared at me. "A what?" "A reservoir," I repeated. Turner burst out laughing. "You're planning to water the valley with that hole?" "Yes." He shook his head. "That quarry's been sitting there half full of rainwater for years. It's not rainwater. It's a spring." The laughter stopped. Turner frowned. "You sure about that?" "I found the pipe feeding it." One of the other men scratched his beard. "There is an old spring line up in those hills." I nodded. If we built a proper basin wall and controlled the flow. The idea grew clearer the more I spoke. The quarry could store water year-round. Turner looked back toward the flooded pit. And what good would that do? It would keep the valley alive during droughts. Silence settled over the ridge. Then Turner shook his head again. "That quarry is 200 feet deep." "Yes." "You planning to build a lake down there?" I smiled slightly. "No. I'm planning to build something better." Because Daniel hadn't bought the quarry for stone. And he hadn't bought it for land. He had bought it because he had seen something the rest of the valley had missed. And standing there on the ridge, looking down into the deep stone pit filled with spring water, I finally understood what that something was. The quarry wasn't useless. It was the biggest water reservoir the valley had ever had. And before long, everyone in the valley would realize just how important that was. For the first few days after I announced my plan, the valley treated it like a joke. Every time I rode through town, someone asked the same question. "How's the Big Lake project coming along?" Where they laughed and said, "Careful you don't drown down there, Mrs. Hale." But I ignored them, because every morning I walked back down into the quarry and studied the walls. The deeper I looked, the more Daniel's decision made sense. The quarry wasn't just deep. It was perfectly shaped. The stone walls formed a natural basin nearly 200 feet across at the bottom, with the old mining ramp spiraling down one side like a road. And the spring feeding the quarry never stopped flowing. Day and night, clear water trickled steadily through the pipe in the rock wall. That meant the water level inside the quarry slowly rose over time. Without any outlet, it simply collected there. Most people saw that as a problem. I saw it as opportunity. If I could control the water, then the quarry could feed the valley through the driest summers. The first thing I did was repair the old mining road. Years of rain and neglect had washed away large sections of gravel, leaving the path dangerous for wagons. I spent 2 full weeks hauling stone and clearing brush until the ramp was wide enough for a cart again. Some of the men from town rode out to watch. "Still digging your lake?" Jacob Turner asked one afternoon. "Still building a reservoir," I replied. He leaned against his horse, watching me move rocks along the ramp. "You know that quarry fills up every spring already?" "Yes." "So why hasn't anyone used it before?" "Because no one tried." Turner shrugged. "Seems like a lot of work for a hole in the ground." I looked down toward the water again. The idea had grown clearer with every day I spent inside the quarry. I didn't just need a reservoir. I needed a system. The spring alone wasn't strong enough to irrigate the valley fields by itself. But the quarry could store water like a giant basin. All I had to do was release it slowly. That meant building a gate. The next step took longer. At the lowest corner of the quarry wall, the stone sloped downward into a natural channel where rainwater used to drain away during the mining days. If I cut an outlet there and built a simple wooden gate to control it, the quarry could feed a controlled stream down into the valley. I spent the next month working on that outlet. At first it was just me, digging, breaking stone, clearing debris, but eventually curiosity brought people down to watch. One afternoon, an older farmer named Caleb Morris climbed down the quarry road and stood beside me. "You serious about this?" he asked. "Yes." He studied the stone wall where I had begun carving the channel. "You planning to drain the quarry?" "Not drain it," I said. "Control it." He nodded slowly. "Well," he said after a moment, "if it works, my farm sits right below this valley." "I know." He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Mind if I help?" That was the moment everything began to change. The next morning, Caleb returned with tools. A few days later, 2 more farmers arrived. Not because they believed my plan would work, but because they were curious. And curious people eventually become involved people. Within a week, 6 men were helping widen the outlet channel through the quarry wall. Jacob Turner came down one afternoon and stood watching the work. "Looks like you've got yourself a crew," he said. "They're helping." He studied the channel for a moment. "You really think this thing will hold enough water to matter?" I gestured toward the deep quarry pool behind us. "Take a guess how much water is in there right now." Turner looked out across the flooded basin. "A lot. Enough to fill every irrigation ditch in the valley." That stopped him. The truth was, the quarry held far more water than anyone realized. The deeper sections of the pit were nearly 60 feet deep, and the spring continued feeding it every day. Once the outlet was built, that water could be released whenever the valley needed it. 3 weeks later, the gate was finished. It wasn't fancy, just a thick wooden door set into the stone channel with iron hinges and a lever to raise or lower it. But it worked. When the gate stayed closed, the quarry held water. When the gate opened, the water flowed. We tested it one clear morning in early spring. A crowd gathered along the ridge above the quarry. Farmers, ranchers, even the lawyer who had delivered Daniel's will. Everyone wanted to see if the strange idea would actually do anything. I stood beside the gate lever. Jacob Turner leaned against the stone wall nearby. "Well," he said, "this ought to be interesting." I pulled the lever. The wooden gate lifted slowly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a deep rumbling sound echoed through the quarry. Water surged toward the outlet channel. Within seconds, a powerful stream burst through the opening and rushed down the carved stone path toward the valley below. The crowd went silent. The water poured steadily into the dry creek bed beneath the quarry. Within minutes, the channel filled completely. Then the water continued flowing outward into the irrigation ditches that ran through the lower farms. Caleb Morris laughed loudly. "Well, I'll be damned." Jacob Turner stared down the valley as the water spread across the fields. "That quarry," he muttered, "is watering the entire valley." I lowered the gate again. The stream slowed, then stopped. Just like that. The reservoir worked. Word spread through the valley faster than wildfire. Within days, farmers were riding up to the quarry asking the same question. "When can we open the gate again?" Because spring that year turned dry. Unusually dry. The streams shrank earlier than usual. Grass stopped growing across the lower pastures. But the quarry stayed full. The spring feeding it never stopped. So whenever the valley needed water, we opened the gate, and the reservoir released exactly what the farms needed. By midsummer, the entire valley depended on the quarry. Fields that would normally dry out stayed green. Cattle had water. Crops survived. One evening, Jacob Turner stood beside me on the ridge overlooking the quarry. "You know," he said quietly, "most people thought Daniel was crazy for buying this place." I looked down at the still water far below. "He wasn't crazy." "No," Turner admitted. "He just saw something the rest of us didn't.